Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Live with CXPA. I am Gabe Smith, CCXP. I'm the content manager for CXPA and the host for today's program. A program that I am really excited about for really a couple reasons. One, the content for our discussion today came from CXPA's discussion and networking forum. So if you're not a member of CXPA, the networking forum is really a place where CX professionals can come together and ask questions about critically important topics that can help drive their CX programs as well as their careers forward. So we had a question that was posted to our forum in April of 2019, actually, and so I wanted to share the question with you. It says, "Hi everyone. I'm looking for ideas and or examples of how companies have branded their CX program internally and or externally for their customers. Also, how did you go about getting the name? Outside agency, internal vote, employee brainstorm, looking for ideas as I continue to build out a CX program and a new VOC program for my company." So, question was posted. Another one of our members and one of our guests for today's broadcast, Christopher Stark of Topbox, he replied and said, "Great questions. I actually launched the CX program while I was with Nike, and branding the program was half the battle in terms of gaining acceptance. I learned a ton from developing the program and actually have a short strategy deck. I'd be more than happy to go through. Feel free to shoot me an email." So that response triggered a lot of other members who basically said some variation of, "Hi, yes, I would love that deck. Can I get that deck also?" And that response has continued off and on over the past year or so. So we really kind of had a couple choices. We could keep deluging Chris with comments and requests to send the deck, where we can have a great conversation, a broadcast now that we have a platform here on LinkedIn Live to really bring this conversation into an even bigger spotlight. So here we are. So before I introduce our guest today, I always like to hear from you. I want to hear from you. Where are you in the world? Where are you watching from today? Please go ahead and let us know where you are. I see Ellen got us started. Hello from Belize. Great to see you, Ellen. Thank you for joining us today. Let me know where you are. We'll make sure to try to bring your comments onto the screen. So looking forward to hearing where you are in the world today. So we'll look to showcase some of those locations, but see, we're coming in here. We've got Minneapolis. Hey, Chris, great to see you. We've got Ellen in Denver. They're coming in so fast I can barely click. We've got Alusola from Nigeria. We've got Armand from Lebanon. We have, I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name in advance, Kyriakos from Cyprus. Andrea from Cincinnati. Agnieszka from Dublin. Welcome to you all. It's great as always. We have Josephine from Ghana. Great as always to see a global audience of CX professionals who are tuning in to these broadcasts. So as a quick reminder before bringing in my guests, you can ask questions anytime into the, put your comments into LinkedIn. We'll try to get to them during the broadcast. So just let us know if you've got a question for any of our guests today. So I want to get started and introduce our first guest, and that is Nancy Porte, CCXP. Nancy is the Vice President of Global Customer Experience for Verint. She has a background in operations management, and her passion is developing differentiated CX through cross-functional collaboration and employee engagement. She is a CCXP and is a customer experience thought leader. She's a primary contributor to the Verint blog and a regular speaker at industry conferences. So welcome to Live with CXPA, Nancy.
Thank you, Gabe. It's so nice to be here. I am so impressed with our audience from all over the world. I welcome everyone.
Every time I'm amazed. I can't even keep up with the number of comments that are coming in to put the comments on the screen. So it's so awesome and inspiring to know we're such a strong global community and a growing global community.
Yeah, it really is. Really is. That's great.
Yeah, so Nancy, when I was looking back over this discussion thread and just sort of marveling at how it has exponentially grown over the past year, it's clear there's a ton of interest around this topic of internal branding for a CX program. Why do you think it holds such interest for CX practitioners across industries?
I think there's a lot of reasons that it's interesting, and not the very least is it's kind of the capstone of putting together a CX program in an organization, and it's one way where you can, I think, involve the whole organization and give them some ownership in the CX program. So I think the branding is really just pulls it all together. And I would say, in my experience, short of executive sponsorship, which to me is one of the most important qualities that you have to look after, the branding is right after that as far as the effects it's had on our program.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more. You said in my experience. Let's talk a little bit more about your experience. Tell the audience, what experience have you had with internal branding of your CX program? Take us through what that was like.
Sure. I'd love to say it was deliberate. I didn't have the resources. I'm so excited about our other guests today, because if I'd known they'd existed, I might have had a little bit more deliberate venture. But here's what happened to us. So we had a major rebranding of our company about 3 years ago. And because the customer is a big part of our DNA, as the customer experience manager, I was on that team to rebrand the company. So the VP of branding, as we were going through this experience, and it did take a long time to actually complete the rebranding of the company, I certainly gained an appreciation for the importance of branding, but the VP of branding really gained an appreciation for the CX program. So when we were done with the branding of the company, she said, your program really deserves its own brand. Let's do that. And so I'm like, well, okay. It's like, I'm not sure how to go about this, but I had her professional guidance and the support of the executive sponsors of the program to do that. And so we did. And it was interesting because you asked me about the internal audience. It was originally designed for internal audiences only. And the name of it was kind of interesting because I had gone by like a sign, and I don't know if it was a car dealership or a bank or something that said, "We have customers for life." And so I started using that as a kind of a placeholder for what our name was eventually going to be, because we're a technology company. So I wanted something unique to us, and I also wanted it to, reflect that technology. Well, it didn't take long, and some of the internal audiences saw the Customers for Life placeholder, and before I knew it, it grew legs. And all of a sudden, everybody was talking about our Customers for Life program. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they're ahead of me. And they were ahead of us. But that's what they wanted. And we realized that phrase, although it wasn't particularly unique out there in the world, it really had resonance for our internal audience. I could sit all day long. I'm sort of an analytics geeky person. So I could sit all day long and say, our customer experience program focuses on 3 different types of feedback, and we bring insights back to the organization. And based on that, we make changes that make customers happy. Mm-hmm. And I didn't get a whole lot of resonance around that. But when I say we have a Customers for Life program, everyone's like, oh, I know what that means. I get that. And so there was almost instantly support and kind of this whole ownership of the CX program.
I like that it just really crystallized everything
did.
that you were focusing on into something that was very memorable. Very cool.
It did. And then on top of that, we found, and again, I think you have success when maybe your stakeholders are even a little bit farther ahead of you and pulling you. And so we had the C4L program, and it was very solid internally. And I started seeing references to our Customers for Life program in the decks that went out from the sales team or from the services team. And so they started using it as a differentiator because our competition didn't have it. And so they're saying, when you are a customer, this is what you get. We have a full program and engagement opportunities. We look for your feedback. We use your feedback. So before I knew it, it became an external program as well. And to the point now where we actually have our own microsite. If you go to Verint.com and under our story, you'll see the whole CX microsite. And I think you can even Google like Verint CX documentary. We made a documentary of our first 5 years of our program. We talked with customers, had them talk about their experience with Customers for Life.
Yeah.
So it's really just blossomed.
I love how in listening to your story, how organic everything happened, from you putting out this placeholder name that then got picked up to suddenly starting to see this program on the sales decks and everything. I mean, that's just speaks to, I think, a testament to, having a customer-centric culture that really grasped and embraced what you were trying to do.
Yeah, I know, but I would much rather say, yeah, I planned every step of the way. But I think, really our employees and our customers developed the program, and we were just sort of the stewards of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Andrea asks, what other brand names have attendees created? That's a great question, Andrea. So definitely chime in the comments section if you've also sort of created this internal branding for your CX program. Would love to hear about that as well. So Nancy, I see you've got a little pin there, a little lapel pin on your.
Yeah. So part of developing the brand was developing a logo. And so we have our C4L logo that you'll see on all the presentations that we do. It's sort of that extra stamp of customership, and so we have that. We have these pins, and these pins are kind of fun because they simply say C4L in their heart. And when we started wearing them, we were at one of our company meetings, and everybody was asking for them. And we decided they were pins to be earned. And so we didn't pass them out like candy. We passed them out to teams that were working on customer efforts. So if you had been involved in a committee or you had increased satisfaction by a certain action, then you earned a pin and you were able to wear the pin. But not everybody automatically got a C4L pin. So they're quite the commodity in the company.
I love that. What a fantastic idea, sort of like earning your stripes.
Yes.
That's great. So Nancy, if you had to boil it down, what would you classify as the single biggest benefit for branding your CX program?
Yeah, I think that one is really easy because it's a rallying cry. For the first time, I think we saw everyone understand and own the CX program. And we all know that one of the risks to CX programs now is, you don't want to be seen as the flavor of the month. And so, another shiny object comes over here for the executives, and there's less, attention on the CX program and more attention at this new shiny object. But for me, Customers for Life has had such a lasting and resilient life in the organization that it really does keep getting stronger as we become more and more mature with the CX program. So the fact that it is, I use rallying cry. I think it is a rallying cry, but I also see that people internally really feel like that's part of my program. Like I have customers, and so we put them in Customers for Life, and And that's been probably the best part for us.
That's fantastic. Well, Nancy, you mentioned that you're excited for our next guest.
Yes.
I am as well. So kind of the guy who helped get all this started, I want to bring him in. That's Chris Stark. He is the Vice President of Solutions Engineering at Topbox. Chris was previously a Customer Experience Director with Nike. He leads Topbox Solutions Engineering Group with a clear mandate for growth and CX innovation. He has unique expertise building a CX program and implementing Topbox at one of the world's largest retail giants. So, Chris, welcome to Live with CXPA.
How you doing? Good to be here.
Great to have you. And I want to introduce your colleague as well. And that is Kahlil Dumas. He's a senior solutions engineer at Topbox. Kahlil helps train new and current customers on how to uncover insights through Topbox and helps institutionalize Topbox by consulting clients on how to report actionable CX insights with an ROI to the organization. So I know before joining Topbox, Kahlil worked with Chris at Nike to report key findings and insights from Topbox to the Nike organization. So welcome, Kahlil.
Hey, Gabe. Thanks for having us. And I appreciate CXPA and all of your work and Molly's work as well for getting this together. So I'm excited to have a good discussion.
Absolutely. So, Chris, really exciting topic. Getting some great engagement in the comments as well. Can you start by just giving us an overview of your work at Nike and take us to the point where you decided that you really needed this internal branding campaign to achieve success?
Yeah, so it actually started in the call center where a lot of CX programs start. So I was actually in an analytics organization at Nike, and we were doing great things with membership, but something was just missing. I felt like people would come to me and say, hey, why isn't this product selling? And I can do all the analysis in the world with all this data, but really at the end of the day, I could just ask them. Sometimes I just don't know why they don't want to buy that product or what it is that they want us to improve. So I went over to the contact center and said, hey, I'm going over here. You guys have a bunch of voice data, chats, surveys. There's just a lot of customer data there. So I went over to the contact center and I started listening. And I started listening in a lot of different channels. Obviously, Nike, there's a lot of channels of communication out there. The multiple surveys, product reviews, chats, calls, emails, all that stuff. And so then I started realizing that the value is within the customer, just listening to them. And Nike was listening to the customer, but everyone had this data across different silos, different business units had the data, and it was kind of this hodgepodge. And what I noticed, people don't care how they're talking to Nike, they're always talking to the swoosh. Doesn't matter what channel is on. So went out and said, you know what, we need to aggregate all this and start listening. Again, this was before, customer experience was a big thing. I did not think I need to do customer experience. That's what I'm doing. That wasn't the case. So long story short, we used Topbox, we aggregated everything, and then came the value. And this is what I really want to emphasize, because you can brand anything all day long, but if there's not value behind it, then the brand doesn't stand for much. And it's very difficult to push a brand. So the first thing I'll say is we push value. What's the value of CX? So first thing we did is say, here's the value of CX. Let's prove out the ROI. So the first thing we did was the ROI factor. And that's where Kahlil came in, because he was actually taking those chats, those calls, and he said, I want to solve these problems. I'm tired of taking these and hearing frustrated customers, and I'll let him talk more to that. But he came on and we started actually churning and burning and proving out the value. What we noticed though was, yes, we were gaining traction, proving out the value, but Nike's such a large organization, we didn't gain as much traction as we wanted. It was still difficult for people to understand who we were, what we were doing. And also people didn't know how to reference us. We were kind of acting as a special projects group. Yes, we were in the contact center, but we were doing this other project where we were listening to the customer and aggregating all this data. So no one knew what to call us. And we didn't want to be labeled as the contact center because we're bigger than that, right? We're all the other data too. So that's when we kind of started this formulating idea of, well, Nike's branding itself as it's one of the best brands in the world. Why don't we brand ourselves as a group, a new group and a new business people can work with? So we got thinking about this, and what I would say to a lot of people is Nike, it's easy because there's brand geniuses everywhere. I will not take any credit that I'm a brand genius, but Nike has a bunch of them. So I said, why don't we leverage the brands that we already have? And that's what I encourage a lot of people to do, is leverage what your company's already doing in terms of the brand value and what it's associated to. So Nike believes if you have a body, you're an athlete. So CX, often mislabeled as voice of consumer, right? Voice of consumer, is it surveys? Is it VOC? What is it? We kind of combined the two, and we said, let's just call it the voice of the athlete, because the athlete is who we're talking about here. It's the customer. So we labeled it as voice of the athlete, and we had a nice little logo of an athlete kind of screaming on a megaphone. There's a cool little logo. But the idea was, we're embodying the voice of the athlete. And the journey that we showed is, we're the coaches. The CX team was the coaches. And then the athlete was the team we were working with, right? So if we're working with the web team because there's a bad experience on the website, or the product team, that was the athlete. And then what we would do is help coach the athlete. Hey, here's how you improve your customer experience. So we had this whole journey that we kind of introduced on how we're coaching these teams and coaching the athletes in this case. So there was a lot of synonymous undertones of what Nike stands for in its brand and what we were doing. And then we would always publish the ROI and the results. And that's the finish line, right? Technically, there is no finish line, just like there's no finish line in CX, another Nikeism there. We always said there's no finish line with CX because the customer's always evolving, our business is always evolving. So that whole dynamicness of how we branded it is kind of what transposed us from just this little ad hoc group into an actual CX brand. And it was great. And Nancy, you mentioned this, but executive sponsorship became a lot easier when they were able to reference us as, oh, you're the voice of the athlete group, right? The VOA. We know who you guys are, versus before it was, hey, you're that special group that just does stuff, listens to the customer, right? So it became a lot easier to reference us. More people knew who we were. We just gained a lot more traction. And instead of us going out to businesses, business units, they started coming to us, which was great.
Yeah, I love that. There's so many great lessons that are there, that you started with, producing value and ROI before you underwent this branding initiative. And then when you did it, you tied it to the existing brand. So that's great. And Kahlil, Chris mentioned ROI. You were able to achieve significant ROI. So take us through, your thoughts on how your internal branding strategy really helped enable those strong results.
Yeah, just taking it a step back, Chris mentioned that when we first started the program, I was leading one of the leaders of the front line at Nike. And what that entailed a lot of the time was just solving issues as they happened. So what I did with that was I said, hey, there are all these friction points and I can prioritize them because I see them every single day. Now that we have this great software, let's actually do something about the whole environment, the whole ecosystem. And what I was really facing there was I was solving issues for really those top customers, not customers as a whole. So when we started to really uncover insights from the customers as a whole, and this is before we had a brand, this was just us solving issues. When I said, hey, there's this awesome group that's led by Chris Stark, and he's actually aggregating all of this great information and actually wanting to assess an ROI and change these things, I said, sign me up. So like Chris mentioned, we started really churning and burning insights out. We were working from groups all over Nike. People were hitting us up for insights, and we had to get a little more tactical with it, right? And that's where the branding really came into effect, was one, establishing that voice of the athlete, creating a brand. And that brand mainly came to fruition through showcasing to leaders throughout the organization what we could address, how we could really marry qualitative and quantitative data together to drive a really convincing story to get the organization to act. So once we had a couple of those wins under our belt, our brand started to organically form itself. And I think that's one of the most powerful things that can happen in branding, is when, the organization tells you what it wants, customers tell you what they want, and your brand essentially puts that all together and tells each party how to communicate with each other. That's really where we found a ton of that value. And that's where, branding came into effect, is, we weren't just those guys that had the insights everyone wanted. We were voice of the athlete, and every executive from all parts of the organizations then knew how to contact us, which increased our visibility, and leaders knew, who to contact, but also it made it easier to align with those functions. when you're talking about insights from any department at Nike, when you say you have the voice of the athlete, everybody's ear perks up. When those comments come in and you can actually read those real time of the friction that customers are having, executives perk up and they have their team start working on those items. So that's really how internal branding helped us. It increased our visibility, but it also made it easier to work with groups, who really needed our assistance.
Yeah, that's awesome. And just as a reminder for the attendees, feel free to ask your questions in the comments. We'll make sure that we address them either now or a little bit later in the most likely a little bit later in the program. So let me ask you this, because looking at the list of attendees, and in CX world, there are some folks who are part of large organizations like Nike. Others are, one man or one woman CX bands. So, do you think, just a kind of an open question to the panel, I'd love anyone to jump in here, should a decision around internal branding really be mandated by the culture of the organization, or do you believe all CX programs, large or small, should really make an effort to sort of brand their program?
I'll take this. This is a good question. So honestly, again, Nike's a huge global corporation. We didn't think about branding it initially. It's when it grew kind of beyond the scope of what we anticipated that we started talking about branding. If you're in a small company or even a mid-sized company and people know who you are, what you're doing, and you have a direct line to an executive already, I don't think branding should be a big focal point for you, especially when you're launching CX. Your big focal point should be proving the value of CX first. I mean, even almost in any company, the value comes first. Larger companies, I think branding takes more of an initiative there because you need to break through a lot of noise. There's a lot of people, a lot of different brands, a lot of different work, programs going on. Smaller, mid-sized companies, though, you're looking to just get stuff done. Look, I work for a small, mid-sized company now, and it's more about getting stuff done in the smaller companies than branding it. Branding creates that adoption that you need, whereas in a smaller mid-sized company, the value proves that adoption a lot faster, I think.
Yeah.
And if I can add to that too, I think that's exactly right. And the other thing is you have to have, I think, pretty much not an immature program, but a fairly mature program before you're branding it. We've had different divisions in our company who've come to us and they're like, you guys have had great success at Customers for Life. We want like services for life. We want sales. We want our own logo around that too. We even had HR come and say, well, what about employees for life? And I'm like, well, first of all, I don't think you want all the employees for life, but second of all, like think about it. But what are you branding? You have to have something to brand, or it looks very empty and it looks and you won't get the benefits. So it's not the first thing you do in a CX program.
And I wanted to add there too, and just give a kind of a story of what happens to a small, medium-sized company when they do try to brand too early. We've been in what we call quarterly business reviews, right? When a client tries to brand internally, and what that ultimately turns into is what Nancy and Chris just said, right? Executives want to know the value. They rarely even mentioned the branding portion, which to that team, they spent a lot of time, on that aspect of it, contrary to a lot of our advice. But, sometimes you have to learn the hard way there. But really, the value is what the executives wanted to see. And where I've seen it go really well is when you have that value right in your back pocket and you're showing additional value and they already know who you are when you walk in the room, right? You're going to have eyes and ears a lot more focused there than trying to, understand value at first. So I just wanted to echo Nancy and Chris there as well.
Yeah, Kahlil, great point, and I want to talk a little bit more about the value generation piece as well. But I got a question here from Kirsten Pinkston, who asks, what challenges did you face establishing your internal brands, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, so there was at Nike. There's a lot. There's noise. There's so many other groups, and there's so many other brands. It's a brand-centric. It's heavy. A brand-centric company. Everyone says, hey, executive, this is why you need to listen to me. And there is probably hundreds of groups like that. I mean, there's so many. But we believe as CXers that the customer, their voice is, and the whole experience they go through, that is the number one thing. So how do we get through all that noise? So how do we sift through all that? So again, one, we already hammered this home, but the value is one thing, but also persistency too, right? It took us probably a year to finally start getting the likes of senior leadership and senior executive close to the C-suite for them to take notice of what we were doing. Every week, we sent out the voice of the athlete, and here's what the athlete's saying this week, and then next week, and then the week after that. So 52 reports went out every week before we even got traction there. So persistency is key, right? And ensuring that you're delivering the right message and the right content, and you'll know you are, because if there's teams acting on it and there's actual ROI to it, then you'll know you're delivering the right content. But don't expect an executive or leadership to adopt your program right out of the gate. That getting through all that was a headache, and it was a ton of work. And that's why I was ecstatic when Kahlil came over to me. Hey, I want to solve these problems. I'm like, great, get on board.
And, I want to kind of add some color there too, right? And Chris, we tend to look at the positives, but when you really look at when we started, there were a lot of just, we were pointing out friction in a lot of departments, and that didn't sit well with some people.
Yeah.
So we had that challenge too of, well, how did you find this? Is this even true? Is it relevant? And ultimately, those questions were welcomed because it solidified our value. We said, go look internally at your data. I know you have no way of really looking at the data how we look at it, but go ahead and validate it. And oftentimes it got validated, which helped us get over that hurdle. But I remember for a long time there were some periods where a lot of our work was validating and making sure, right, that the naysayers had their answers, right? Because ultimately they would be kind of spreading, miscellaneous lies throughout the organization. So I want to be, very candid here. You will face some of those challenges when you start to point out friction in other departments, but be ready to show your value and be ready to tell your whys in terms of this is why this is important.
Yeah. There's go ahead, Nancy.
One of the challenges that we faced early on, I'm interested in Chris and Kahlil if you guys ran into this.
Yeah.
I had already said that the program sort of leaked out and got out a little bit ahead of us, so we were a little ahead of our skis during different parts of the program. But one of the challenges that we faced was that everybody was so excited about it, they interpreted the program as they thought it should be. So our program was very analytical. We had the analytic piece. We also had a program of different engagement opportunities for our customers, around specific activities around customer advisory boards and interview series that we were offering. And then we had advocacy type activities too. And that was our Customers for Life program. But then we had some of our team go out and talk with customers, and they had described it in a way they thought it should be. And they included things that weren't in the program minutes. So we had to pull some of that back and say, well, actually, we don't supply margaritas every other week for customers. But we do some other good things. And so we had to really, crystallize the program and communicate it internally, and then do some enablement on our teams and give them a lot of insight on how to describe the program.
Yeah.
Because without that, they were just doing whatever they thought it should be.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Nancy, and a really great point. There's a question actually for you that came in. I mean, Chris and Kahlil talked a little bit about sort of tying the CX program brand to the master brand. So we have another question for you around the relationship between your CX brand of Customers for Life and the Verint brand. So, what was that relationship?
Yeah, so the CX brand is different, but it has a lot of the components of the Verint brand. So we have the same palette and style, but it is very much the C4L. And I'll give you an example. So as we were working through what the logo would look like, we were talking about journeys. And so we kind of used this ribbon look to our logo and giving it a softer look, but also has that journey component to it. And you won't see that in the main logo. The main logo is a very strong font. So I guess there are elements that keep it a sub logo, but it's a very unique logo.
Yeah, fantastic, and great questions coming in. Thank you all. If you have challenges, that you want to share or questions you want to ask, please do so. But I want to come back to Kahlil. We've been talking about value, and Chris shared how you had all this data that needed to be sort of aggregated. So talk a little bit more about omni-channel analytics. How did that play into your pitch for voice of the athlete to Nike executives, and how does it continue to play a role now in your work with your clients at Topbox?
Yeah, I love this analogy that Chris always gives. He says, if you think about any relationship in your life, the easy one is a spouse, right? If you only listen to your spouse, say in the living room, and you ignore them in every other part of your house, you're gonna have a really weird relationship, right? And the same goes for data. If you only look at surveys, you only look at Power BI or Tableau or Medallia, you ignore chat, you ignore phone, you ignore social media, you ignore web forums, in-app feedback, you're going to have a really distorted view of your customer. So when you start to really bring all those pieces together, you not only have a unified view of your customer, which lets executives sleep well at night knowing they have every channel covered, but also what it does is it gives this kind of unique look at the data, one that I had never seen before. It was one of the reasons I really thought Topbox was fantastic was by issue, by topic, I'm able to see where customers are contacting by what channel. And from an operational standpoint, telling, not only down to what the insights are, but how they're contacting as a means to, save money in terms of, responding to things on different channels. That was a very unique pitch, and one that got us a lot of traction. Was we're bringing in pretty much every interaction that we can get, putting it in one place and slicing and dicing it however you want with whatever things you're trying to get contextual evidence against. That was a game changer and got a lot of executives on board very quickly, because like many big and small organizations, data's siloed. And that's just the nature of how things go today. And we currently work with clients today when we do onboarding who said, wow, I've never listened to a phone call. I've never read a chat before. It becomes very impactful and deep learning for not only the front line, but the C-suite as well. And that's part of, how I would report out, was not only with, hard data, which I mentioned, marrying of qualitative and quantitative data, but with qualitative data. That was really impactful to see what the customers were actually saying in conjunction with data numbers, right? So that was kind of how, omni-channel really helped us provide value, was being able to look at every channel, being able to quantify every channel and look at it by topic, by keyword, by sentiment, and by other factors, other metadata that is incorporated in Salesforce.
Customers will dictate your brand, whether you like it or not. If there could be a post on Reddit about your brand right now, and they're having a field day, and they're building a group that's establishing your brand, and you may not even know about it. And so there's channels out there. I guarantee everyone on this webinar, there is a channel out there you're not listening to, hands down, where customers are. The key is, they don't care. They don't care where they are when they communicate. TikTok didn't even exist, a year or two ago? Great, guess what? Majority of your customers are going on there now. Your customers are gonna jump to different channels all the time, and they're gonna dictate how they feel and what their experience is. There's no stopping them. The only thing you can do is analyze all of it, because they're all your customers, regardless, right? And a lot of people say, well, if it's really important, they'll call or chat. Will they? It depends. These days, with different generations, they go to different channels, different problems, different channels. So we saw that, and we saw that, people don't care. Again, I'm talking to Nike or about Nike. It's the swoosh. That's how I view you guys. So I always said, why don't we view our customer the same way? Why do we view them as these data points that, oh, this is a chat. Oh, this is a tweet. This is a post. That's not how they should be viewed. They need to be viewed holistically as a single entity, a single person. So that was the big thing. That was the whole Omni piece that we were trying to gun for. That was our goal. We didn't realize, I'll be frank, Kahlil and I did not realize how powerful it would be, and how easy it would be to build the CX program around that. So the omni-channel piece is imperative to building our Voice of the Athlete brand.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you may have sent some folks scrambling to Reddit to see if anybody's talking about their brand.
Yeah.
That's one that hadn't come up on my radar, but you're
And
absolutely right.
I wanted to add on to that, Chris. I think, that first part, and that was something that was very eye-opening for me. When I prepared this huge presentation for the second in charge at Nike, and the thing that they were focused on was the comment that I put on the slide. They saw the data, they saw what was going wrong, but they went, wow, they really said that about us? And I said, yes, that's what, hundreds of thousands of people are saying. That really resonated. And I wanted to kind of give a story too about that omni-channel piece with Reddit. We worked with a very prominent delivery service, and at the start of the pandemic, contactless, delivery was starting. It was a new thing, and customers were, contacting about that, but the delivery people weren't. They were pretty much silent until we started ingesting Reddit. Did we understand that there were hundreds of thousands of workers talking about how bad the rollout was for contact delivery? And what we were able to do from that point was fix the friction in there and supply those delivery people with what they were asking for in that channel, and also send out internal memos to let them know that they were heard, right? So there was also this kind of win component too of EX that we got into, but that channel of Reddit was a game changer. Being able to ingest that and see those issues through that channel was something that I, now when I have new clients, I encourage them to look at forums, look at other sites where they maybe aren't thinking about, because there's a lot of great feedback in those.
A lot of communities.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, you mentioned TikTok not existing. I mean, Glassdoor, others popping up every day that we may be not even aware of what we're missing out on.
Yep.
Exactly.
They're all important. They're all your customers, right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. We got a comment here from James who said, this is fascinating for someone from the events industry. Your knowledge on internal brand engagement is really important for our internal corporate events and how we message internally. Love to learn more. Awesome, James. We'll be talking about some other opportunities to continue this conversation. Michael also said, this has been extremely eye-opening to the world of CX and what other organizations are working towards. Thanks for sharing your insights to your CX teams. And one other, looks like we have time for one last question. James follows up and says, how do we engage employees in a deeper way through a strong internal brand and internal events, virtual or live? It's a really great question.
Yeah, so how do you engage employees in a deeper way? So we kind of touched on this too. Sometimes employees are reluctant to take in CX, right? Because there is, like Kahlil said, it's friction, right? Sometimes there's always, the experience isn't always up to par, and you have to deliver the bad news or hang out some dirty laundry. One thing I can say, in order to get people to adopt CX and buy a brand, I'll give you a little synopsis here. Designers are a tough group. They're artists, and if you go to them and tell them how to redesign something, they'll probably tell you the customer doesn't know what they're talking about. I'm a forward thinker. I know them better than they know themselves. And it's tough. There's people who believe that the customer is not always right. And they exist in every company. What we found was we actually would go to those people. We'd have 10 things that, hey, these 10 things are broken. They need to be fixed. But the 11th thing says what that team's doing really well. And so what we would do, if it's our first time saying, hey, here's our brand, here's who we are, we would actually not give them any of the bad news. All 10 of those things we'd kind of just put behind us, and we'd say, we just want to let you know how much the customer loves what you're doing here, what this thing. They love you because you do this. And what that started doing is that it started kind of going through their head that it's reinforcing, maybe the customer does know what they're talking about. Like, this is good. I like this. I like hearing from the customer. Them kind of stroking my ego and telling me how great I am at my job. Then the next time we meet, and okay, yeah, they really like this, but hey, have you thought about this? Oh yeah, I'll think about that. And then eventually we get to a point where we have a good enough relationship where we can just go back and forth, right? It's kind of like the first date, right? The first date, just be nice, all good manners, everything's good. And then by the end of it, you're like, hey, this looks terrible. You got to fix this. Come on. Yeah. So we really engage with employees through that methodology because, again, people are reluctant. It's hard to push CX when we all know there's so much to do.
Yeah.
Yep. And related to that too, one of the things we learned early on was to share the positive. That's really important.
Mhm.
And it becomes part of your brand, by the way, because you don't want your brand to be, I am always the one who's wagging my finger and telling you what you're doing wrong with the customer. It is equally as important to tell the organization what they're doing right. So one of the things that the exec sponsor of our program is really big on this, and he inspires me to do this, and I should do it more often, but we will look for comments in our surveys or comments on social media or wherever they come in. And when they're about a specific employee, we'll snag it, we'll put it in an email, copy their boss. And you would think, oh, that's just a simple thing. That's not a very big deal. It's a huge deal. It is, I would say, life-changing for some people that see the comments and that their work is really appreciated by the customers. So sharing specific comments, but also sharing, where they're getting high satisfaction rates overall, I think are really important. And the last thing I wanted to bring up too, Gabe, really quickly is, once you develop a brand for your CX program, there's a responsibility that you carry. One of the earlier points was that your brand becomes, you can't just dictate your brand. And it grows, and over time, you are your brand. But one of the things that I demand of my group is that they treat internal customers and external customers the same. They are to be responsive, they are to be positive, they are to be proactive, make it easy to do business with us as an organization, but us as a CX team too. And we need to be the models and I think the champions of how we want customers treated too. So I hold my CX team to a pretty high standard, and then that has over time too become a lot of our brand.
Remember how I said we kind of had we were the coaches and there was the athlete and that was the team we're working with. We always said we need to celebrate the wins, right? The results. That's kind of a mantra. Celebrate the wins. We would always give credit to the team that did the work, right? So we're the coaches. The athlete gets all the credit. They're the one that crosses the finish line. The team that actually makes the improvement, right? Because CX doesn't pull the levers. We don't code the website. We don't design the product. Those other teams do. So we always celebrated the wins and gave those teams credit so they look like rock stars. No one, who's LeBron James's coach? No one, I don't know who his coach is, but LeBron. And so we would always make sure we're in the background, and at the forefront is the team that can drive the change. So when we make people look good, people want to work with us.
And that's huge, right? And I'm a huge habit nerd. I love reading and learning about breaking and making new habits. And I think, I oftentimes with our clients, when we first start off, say, hey, you're about to endure on breaking some of your company's worst habits. So how do you do that softly? You have to have positive reinforcement. You have to show them what they do well. And to Chris's point, we always lead with what's going right so that they have something to bring back, right, to their leaders so that they can make them look good, to Chris's point. So I always tell people to think about it like that. You're rebuilding habits for your organization. We like to think about businesses and organizations, right? We say that term, but we're really just people, right? So how do you encourage and inspire people to change what's been going on and creating friction in an organization? You have to have positive reinforcement and show them what they're doing well.
Yeah.
So they can continue.
Well, speaking of positive reinforcement, Marco says, thank you for sharing all this information and tips. In Brazil, large companies are beginning to understand the values of CX. Absolutely, Marco. It's a journey all around the world. So keep up the great work. And I want to thank today's guests, Nancy Porte, CCXP, Kahlil Dumas, and Chris Stark. Thank you guys so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Gabe.
Thanks, Gabe.
Thank you. It was a ton of fun.
All right. So if you are interested in learning more from Chris is doing a workshop tomorrow, which you can register for by visiting cxpa.org/event calendar. That's in partnership with our Portland CXPA network, but open to anyone from around the globe. So be sure to check that one out. While you're there, we hope that you will consider becoming a member. So in addition to getting access to the networking forum where you can interact with global CX pros like Chris, you're also going to gain access to our professional mentoring program, as well as member pricing on our CCXP exam. And you've got a vast library of CX resources and CX tools that you can use to elevate your CX program as well as your career. So we also hope that you're going to join us on Monday, December 21st at 2 p.m. Eastern. We've got another special live with a CXPA event called Looking Back, Looking Forward. It's the end of the year, so perfect inflection point to think about what we've accomplished in spite of the challenges of 2020. Hope you'll join us as we spotlight what we've achieved this year and look ahead to what we've got planned for an ambitious 2021. So thank you all for joining. Hope you stay healthy and safe and that we see you on Monday.